It's all about money. It's all about greed. They get paid, AIG gets paid, the investment bank gets paid, the bank gets these things, and when they start to have trouble, Paulson leaves Goldman Sachs, comes to government under Bush, forces $1 trillion from the taxpayers, and then just pays the banks back. This thing was nothing other, if you back up from it a little bit, was simply a transfer of about $1 trillion from U.S. taxpayers to the banks on Wall Street. When you take all the thises and that's out of it, that's what occurred, bottom line. Outrageous.
Let's talk about derivatives. It's another painful subject. I just want to give a few minutes to this. We know that they're considered weapons of mass destruction in finance. But what are they?
Well, a derivative is a term that has grown up in the investment community over the last, I don't know how many years. When I was an active banker, I'd never heard the term. So they become investment vehicles over the last several years. A derivative basically means that it is an instrument which embraces some asset underneath it. So let me give you an example. If you were buying, if you were going to buy 100 ounces of gold, and you went to a precious metals broker and you bought 100 ounces of gold, and you'd have the gold, you're just buying the gold. But you can go to the commodities exchange and you can buy a contract for 100 ounces of gold, and now you have a derivative. That just simply means that the power of the asset of that contract is derived from the gold itself. But you don't own the gold, you own the contract. That's the difference, and that's why it's a derivative. In other words, the contract derives its asset value from the underlying asset. That's what a derivative is.
Doesn't that represent the whole futures market and commodities then?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. But in addition, and why that term has come to the public consciousness of late, is because the subprime mortgages were packaged up as securities, like a stock or a bond, and sold. And so they were called derivatives because the asset value is the actual mortgages. But you didn't own the mortgages, you're buying the package of mortgages, and so that's why they're derivatives.
This is a very complex matrix.
Derivatives, that's right.
Very complex matrix.
Yeah. Was that understandable?
Yes.
Okay.
But very complex.
Yeah.
I can see why the average person is not involved in it, doesn't understand it, doesn't talk about it, and even when they get their contracts, doesn't really understand what they're dealing with, except there's a distinction between what is an asset and a derivative thereof, which is simply a piece of paper.
Well, you're exactly right, and the truth is, at the bottom of a lot of that, you really hit one of the key nails on the head. At the bottom of this mess is simply people that don't understand, and this includes congressmen. I've sat there and watched on C-SPAN going back to when Greenspan used to testify, and you listen to Alan Greenspan talk. It is psychobabble. It is the meanings are ridiculous. Well, Greenspan was the maestro. He was this. He was that, and so these congressmen would sit and listen to him, kind of slack-jawed, their eyes glazed over. But if you ever asked Greenspan what the hell he meant by what he was saying, it was just, again, to use the term psychobabble, it was gibberish. And so if big fancy terms like derivatives and credit default swaps and collateralized debt obligations, these terms all get thrown around. They're just simply instruments that financial instruments that get bought and sold. But when people don't understand them, they tend to turn away from them and not confront them.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember when I heard Henry Paulson talk about credit default swaps, and I tried to call all these people to explain it to me. And I did finally find somebody in New York and London, and we're doing an entire show on credit default swaps and nothing but credit default swaps. But I wanted to lay out a general understanding to the public from your perspective and context, which is more of a whole systems context. If you don't mind us switching for a minute here, the House Appropriations Committee apparently is of concern to you. Why?
Well, the House Appropriations Committee is one of the committees in the House, and that's how business gets done in the House of Representatives. There are committees that oversee taxes and education and health and so forth and so on. That committee deals with the appropriations or how to pay for legislation. That's what that committee does generally. But I was basically taking a quote from a member of that committee, and it's a powerful committee because it, as you can see, it controls funding. But he was making a point that was jaw-dropping to me, which was, and I should have my book in front of me. I don't. But the quote is, the concept of the quote was this: well, people are making a lot of money and they shouldn't be able to keep it, and we basically need to spread the wealth around. And there's a problem with people who make a lot of money and aren't willing to give it to others. I mean, it's an extremely communistic point of view, and it goes back. And I'm not throwing that label on that guy or the president, but if you go back to the election and the famous Joe the Plumber conversation. When Obama is talking to Joe the Plumber, he says, "Well, I think it's good if we spread the wealth around, taking from the people who earn it and giving it to people who don't." So there are other quotes in that chapter, I think from Barney Frank, from this member of the House Appropriations Committee, which make it clear that there is an underlying tone in this administration that there's something the matter with people who make money. I am not defending insurance companies or banks or any corporate entity, but the idea in this government, in this administration, seems to be that if you're wealthy, if you're successful, then you have to give some of it to people who don't have it, and if you don't do that, we're going to force it. I mean, look at where we are here today, Kim. You've got the government owning General Motors. They own AIG. They're in the banking business. They're in the auto business. They're in the insurance business. And they want to be in the healthcare business. I mean...
Healthcare and control business.
Kremlin, 1974, excuse me.
It's the healthcare and control business, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another...
Yeah, but it's a part of it.
That law is the most Orwellian piece of legislation I've ever seen.
I agree. I just did a show on that this morning, actually, about the health freedom paradigm. The health freedom concern was left out of the health care bill, yes. Focus, and dialogue. Back to Gordon Brown, who really wanted a new Bretton Woods. Why?
Well, just for the listeners' sake, towards the end of the Second World War, as basically at the point where the Allies had basically won it, there was a meeting called in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where the powers of the world at that time, and we were king of the world then, structured a new financial system in terms of how currencies would relate to one another. I don't want to get into all that. It can get complicated, but basically it put the U.S. dollar as the king of world currency. The financial crisis, as I said, was created to take the dollar down and to take the U.S. down as kind of the king of the world economy and put these bankers in Switzerland in charge. The call for removing the U.S. and putting an international financial dictator in place, the euphemism for that has been a new Bretton Woods. And Gordon Brown has been a leading advocate of that.
You said that on April 2nd, 2009, that the president signed some type of instrument turning over financial control.
That's right.
Is there a way we can verify that?
Yeah, by all means. By all means you can. I mean...
How do we do it? Where do we look?
Again, I'll reference the book because the data is in there, and I've taken it from there. And folks,
so it's in Crisis by Design.
Yeah, the book. That book, as a quick promotional aside, that book is available at behindthewizardscurtain.com. Behindthewizardscurtain.com. That's where the book is. And you can just go to the Bank for International Settlements website which I think it's bis.org, although I